The worst thing that happened to me that Tuesday was not dying, it was coming back. I want you to hold that for a moment before I explain anything. Because everything I am about to tell you depends on you understanding that sentence. The man who came back to his body in that hospital room did not come back relieved, he came back devastated. And the reason he was devastated is the reason you are watching this right now. My name is Robert Mercer. I was a banker for 31 years. Senior Vice President of Commercial Lending at First Heartland Bank in Kansas City, Missouri. I am not a preacher. I am not a prophet. I am not someone who spent his life in spiritual circles talking about the afterlife. I am the man who sat across the desk from families and told them whether their mortgage was approved. I am the man who sat on the risk committee and reviewed exposure reports every quarter. Numbers, probability, documentation. That is who I was for 31 years. If you have ever had the quiet feeling that the number in your bank account is less secure than you have been told, subscribe to this channel. There are more accounts like mine, and I believe you are someone who needs to hear them. And in the comments, I want to ask you one thing. What is the one part of your financial life you have been meaning to look at honestly and keep moving to next month? Write it. Because what I was shown about the people who survived what is coming is that they asked that question before they had to. And that is exactly why I was chosen to tell you what I am about to tell you. On March 14th, 2023, I died at my desk. I was in full cardiac arrest for 22 minutes. The hospital record exists. The defibrillation log exists. My name is on both of them. The cardiologist who brought me back is named in the documentation. I am not asking you to take my word for this. I am telling you that the paperwork is real, and the paperwork is the least important part of what happened that morning. The most important part is what I was shown while I was gone. I need you to hear it. Because I was not shown it for myself. I was told, directly, specifically, in a way I am going to describe, that this message was meant to reach people who could still do something about it. And if you are watching this video, I believe you are one of those people. Let me take you back to that Tuesday. It was an ordinary morning in every way that matters. I had been at my desk since 7:45. I had a large coffee from the break room, the kind with too much of the flavored creamer my assistant Sarah kept stocked because she knew I pretended not to like it but always used it. I had reviewed 2 loan applications before 9 o'clock. The third one was a commercial real estate refinance, a family-owned warehouse in Independence, Missouri, $2,300,000, the kind of deal I had processed hundreds of times. I was writing the loan officer's initials in the approval box when the pen stopped working. Except the pen was fine. It was my hand. It stopped moving. And then I understood that what I was feeling in my chest was not muscle soreness from the gym the night before, which is what I had been telling myself for about 40 minutes. The pressure behind my sternum was something else. It was a wrongness, a shift in the building, except the building was me. The pen hit the floor. I heard it hit the floor. And then I did not hear anything for 22 minutes. What the medical report describes is this: spontaneous coronary artery dissection, a tear in one of the arteries feeding the heart. It happens without warning. There is no plaque buildup, no prior symptoms that would flag on a standard screening. You are a 58-year-old man with a reasonably clean bill of health, and then you are not. My heart stopped at 11:42 in the morning. My assistant Sarah found me on the floor approximately 4 minutes later. EMS arrived at 11:51. The first defibrillation shock was delivered at 11:53. My heart restarted, stopped, restarted again. The second cardiologist who reviewed the case wrote in her notes, "Neurological outcome uncertain at time of resuscitation." That is medical language for, "We did not know if I would come back intact, or at all." 22 minutes. I need you to understand what 22 minutes of clinical death means. It means the machine that was running your body shut off completely. Not dimmed, not paused, off. The EEG would have been flat. There was no blood moving through my brain. There was no electrical activity in my heart. By every measurable clinical standard, I was not present in that building. But I was somewhere. And the moment I knew I was somewhere else was not dramatic. That is the thing about it that is hardest to explain. There was no tunnel first. There was no rush of light. What happened was quiet. I became aware that I was no longer in pain. The wrongness in my chest that had been expanding for 40 minutes was simply gone. And with it went every other physical sensation I had been carrying without realizing it. the slight tightness I always had in my left shoulder, the low-grade fatigue I had classified as normal for a man my age, the noise, all of it gone, not faded, gone, like a room where all the appliances have been switched off simultaneously, and you only understand how loud they were by the quality of the silence they leave. I was aware of myself. I was aware of where I had been. I was not afraid. That was the most disorienting part. I had spent years, in the private part of my mind that I did not share with anyone, being afraid of dying. Not in a consuming way, just the low background frequency of a man past 50 who knows the actuarial tables. And standing in whatever I was standing in, I understood that the fear had been based on an assumption that was simply wrong. But I am getting ahead of myself, because before the peace there was something else. And that something else is the reason I resigned from First Heartland Bank 18 months after coming back. It is the reason I moved my family's finances. It is the reason I am speaking to you right now, years after the event, when every professional instinct I developed over 3 decades tells me to keep my mouth shut and my credibility intact. I was shown something, and what I was shown was specific. I need to tell you about the review first. I did not experience my life the way you might imagine. It was not a film reel running start to finish. It was not a highlights package. What happened was more like standing in the center of a room where every wall, floor, and ceiling was covered in moments from my life, all present simultaneously, all equally vivid, and I could see any of them by turning my attention toward it. Not chronological, thematic. And the theme that dominated was not what I expected. I expected to see my family, my wife Linda, my kids, the moments that would matter. And they were there, yes, but what kept drawing my attention, what kept pulling my focus the way a bright light pulls your eyes in a dark room, was my career. 31 years of decisions, loans approved and denied, risk assessments completed and filed, meetings attended, reports signed. And what I understood standing in that review was something that no one in my industry would want said out loud. I had been participating in something I had chosen not to fully understand. Not out of corruption. I want to be precise about this because it matters. I was not a dishonest man. I did not falsify documents. I did not approve loans I knew to be fraudulent. What I had done was something quieter and in some ways more corrosive. I had asked only the questions that the system rewarded asking. I had accepted the foundational assumptions of the financial world I operated in because examining them would have ended my career, and I had a mortgage and 2 kids in college and a wife I loved. I had looked at the floor I was standing on and seen it was solid because everyone around me agreed it was solid, and I had chosen not to look at what was underneath it. I saw all of this in the review. I saw it without judgment, which was the strangest part. There was no voice telling me I had failed. There was just complete understanding. I saw what I had known and set aside. I saw the moments where something in me had recognized a structural fragility, and I had closed the door on it because I had a 9 o'clock call and a family and a parking space with my name on it. And then I was shown what that floor was built on. I need you to understand what I mean when I say I was shown something. This is not a metaphor. This is not a dream image or a symbolic vision that I have interpreted over time. What happened was direct. The presence, and I am going to call it what it was because I have spent 2 years trying to find a way to say it that doesn't sound like what it was, and I cannot. The presence I understood to be Jesus showed me the dollar, not as a concept, not as a political argument about monetary policy, as a living system with a specific, measurable, already scheduled endpoint. What I saw was a covenant. That is the only word that works. The US dollar had been at some point in history a covenant, a promise backed by something real. And I was shown the moment that covenant was broken. It was not recent, it was decades ago. And what I understood in that moment was that the breaking of the covenant did not cause an immediate collapse because the system had enough momentum, enough institutional inertia, enough shared agreement to keep moving forward. Like a wheel spinning after the axle has already cracked. The crack had been there for decades. What I was shown next was the date the wheel stops. I want to stop here and tell you something about how this information arrived, because I have had 2 years to think about it and I want to be as honest as I can. The date did not arrive like a voice saying a number. It arrived the way a conclusion arrives when you have done the math correctly and the answer appears on the page and you know it is right, not because you hope it is, but because every calculation behind it confirms it. It arrived with a weight of inevitability that I had only ever experienced once before in my career, And that was the morning in 2008 when I looked at our portfolio's exposure to mortgage-backed securities and understood, before the news had fully broken, that something catastrophic was already in motion. That feeling, that particular quality of professional recognition. Except this time it was not a portfolio. It was the entire system. The date is in 2026. I am not going to tell you exactly which month without giving you the full context of what I was shown around it, because the date without the context is just a number and the context is everything. What I will tell you is this. I was shown a morning, an ordinary Tuesday morning like the one I died on. And on that morning, ordinary Americans, people who had done nothing wrong, people who had saved responsibly, people who had followed every rule the financial system had given them, attempted to access their accounts and could not. Not all accounts, not all banks, not simultaneously, but in a sequence that I watched play out from above it, the way you watch a domino chain from above the table. One institution, then the response to that institution, then the response to the response. And within a window that I understood to be days rather than weeks, the access to ordinary savings became something that could not be assumed. I watched the faces of people at ATMs. That is the detail I have carried with me every day since I came back. Not the numbers, not the mechanism. The faces at the ATMs, the particular expression on a face when something that has always been there is simply gone. I recognized that expression. I had seen it in my office. I had seen it on the faces of clients who came in after 2008 asking me to explain what had happened to the equity in their homes. That specific quality of disbelief, not panic, not anger, just the face of a person learning that a thing they were certain was solid had, in fact, not been solid at all. I was shown those faces in 2026, and I want to be honest with you about something because I think you deserve honesty and I think you can handle it. The collapse I was shown is not the result of a single political decision or a single election or a single event. It is the scheduled consequence of decades of structural weakening. It does not matter who is in office when it arrives. It does not matter what policy is enacted in the next 12 months. What I was shown was a system that had been operating past its integrity for longer than most people realize, and a date when the operating pretense could no longer be maintained. Think about your own savings for a moment. I am not asking you to panic. I am asking you to think, the way I should have thought 30 years ago, about the structure underneath the balance. You see a number on a screen. That number represents a promise made by an institution backed by a system, resting on a foundation of shared agreement that the promise means something. I spent 31 years in that system. I approved $2 billion worth of those promises. And what I was shown is that the agreement is running out. I need to tell you what came after the collapse because this is the part that changed everything for me. Because I assumed when I was being shown the collapse that this was the bad news. I assumed the vision was a warning about an ending. And then the present showed me what came after. And I want to be precise about this because I do not want to give you false comfort and I do not want to give you unnecessary despair. What came after was not a paradise. It was not a simple restoration. What I was shown was a clearing. A system built on something false being removed, and in the space that removal created, something different becoming possible. The people in that vision who were not afraid had one thing in common. It was not that they had the right financial instruments. It was not that they had made the correct investment decisions. It was not that they had followed the right advice from the right financial commentators. The people who moved through what I was shown without fear were people who had, at some point before the collapse, honestly reckoned with the question, what do I actually need? Not what do I want? Not what am I accustomed to? What do I actually need? And they had restructured their lives, at least partially, around the answer. The answer was not complicated. It was not esoteric. It was, in fact, embarrassingly basic compared to the complexity of the financial system it was replacing. Community, tangible skills, relationships that do not require institutional mediation, a knowledge of what your actual baseline requirements are versus what the consumer economy has told you your baseline requirements are. The people who moved without fear were people who had been, in some quiet way, preparing for the possibility that the number on the screen might one day mean nothing. Not because they had predicted the collapse, because they had asked the honest question and lived accordingly. I need you to hear me clearly. I am not telling you to withdraw your savings. I am not telling you to buy anything or invest in anything or follow any particular financial strategy. I am a banker who was shown something, and what I was shown was not a product, it was a question. And the question is this: if the number in your account went to zero tomorrow, what would you still have? That is the question I was sent back to ask you. I was sent back to ask you specifically. I want to tell you what happened when I was told to return, because it is the part of this experience that I have had the most difficulty describing and the most difficulty living with. I did not want to come back. I need you to understand that without catastrophizing it. I am not telling you I was suicidal before the event or that I have been since. That is not what I mean. I mean that in the place I was in, the idea of returning to a body, to a world I had just been shown was heading toward a crisis that I was now aware most people did not see coming, felt like being asked to carry a weight that I could measure the exact size of. And I had just been somewhere with no weight at all. And I asked, directly. I am telling you this because it happened, and the answer is part of the testimony. I asked, why me? Not with self-pity, as a genuine professional question. The kind of question I would ask in a credit committee. Explain the reasoning behind this assignment. The answer was not comforting. It was clarifying. The answer was, because you know what it means. Not because you are special, not because you have been chosen for your righteousness, because you spent 31 years inside the system being warned about, and you understand its mechanics, and a warning about the failure of a financial system delivered by a senior vice president of commercial lending carries a different weight than the same warning delivered by someone outside the institution. You are the last person the intended audience would expect to say this. That is why you were chosen to say it. Let that land for a moment. I have sat with that answer for 2 years. Some days it makes sense to me, and some days it feels like an enormous weight that I did not ask for and do not feel adequate to carry. I left First Heartland Bank. I do not work in finance anymore. I moved my family's assets not into gold or cryptocurrency or any particular hedge, because the vision was not a financial prospectus. It was a warning about a structural reality, and structural realities require structural responses, not financial products. I spend my time now doing exactly what I was asked to do, which is finding ways to deliver this message to people who can hear it before there is no longer time to act on it. And here is the cost of knowing something like this. I sit in traffic. I watch the news. I read the financial reports, and I see the same patterns I saw in the review of my career. The same collective agreement to look at the floor and not the foundation. I talk to people I love about perfectly ordinary things, and I know, with the kind of knowing that does not come from analysis but from having been somewhere and been told, that the ground is less solid than they believe. And I cannot tell them in most conversations because most conversations are not ready for it. I can only tell people like you, people who were looking for this, people who already had the feeling that something was coming, something real, something that the official voices around them were not describing with honesty. People who needed to hear it from a specific kind of person, not a mystic, not a minister, not a survivalist, but a banker. The kind of man who spent 3 decades approving the financial promises of institutions whose structural integrity I was shown on the other side of clinical death does not extend to the date I was given. I want to ask you to do something this week. One specific thing, and I am going to tell you exactly what I mean by it. I want you to sit down, not in front of the news, not with your phone in your hand. Sit down and write a number. The number is this. If your bank accounts were inaccessible for 30 days, what would your household need that it does not currently have access to without those accounts? I am not asking you to calculate a financial hedge. I am asking you to conduct the audit that I was shown most people had not conducted. The audit of actual dependency. What do you actually need as opposed to what you have learned to assume will always be available? Food, water, heat, community, medical basics. The people in your immediate circle who would show up if the system stopped mediating your relationships. Write the number. Look at it honestly. That is not paranoia. That is what I was told to tell you. I have done this myself. My wife Linda and I did it together on a Sunday afternoon about 4 months after I resigned. It was one of the most clarifying afternoons we have had in 27 years of marriage. Not because the list was short, because making the list forced to honesty about what we had been assuming and what we had actually built. The gap between those two things was where the real work was. That is the work. That is the practical translation of what I was shown. Not fear, not a specific financial move. An honest reckoning with the gap between what you assume is secure and what is actually secure, regardless of what the institution behind the number on your screen decides to do. You are watching this video right now for a reason. I believe that, not as a comfort, but as a statement about how this kind of message works. I was told that the warning needed to reach people who could still act on it. I was told that the specific weight of my professional background was the reason I was sent back with it. A retired school teacher does not sit down with this video for the same reason a person with financial anxiety, with savings they are not sure about, with a low-frequency worry about what is underneath the floor they are standing on. That person does not find this video by accident. If any part of what I have shared today landed in you, not as fear, but as recognition, subscribe to this channel. Not for me, because there are more accounts like mine, and I believe you are someone who needs to hear them. The people who were shown in the vision moving through the collapse without fear had been paying attention before it arrived. This channel is one way of paying attention. It is not the only way, but it is the way I was given to contribute to it. In the comments, I want to ask you something specific. Write this. What is the one thing in your financial life that you have been meaning to look at honestly and have not? The one item on the mental list that you keep moving to next month. Write it, not for me, because sometimes the act of naming something is the first step of actually dealing with it. And what I was shown in the panoramic review of my own life is that the things I had been moving to next month were exactly the things that mattered most. I came back to this life against my preference. I am telling you that plainly because it is true. I came back because I was told to, because there was a specific thing to deliver to specific people before a specific date. This is part of that delivery. Whatever is coming, and I know what is coming, I hope this reaches you while there is still time to look honestly at the floor you are standing on. Not with fear, with open eyes.